cylinder-like structures, again, are the fimbriae. And they will come close to the ovary at ovulation. They taper, but this trumpet portion is known as the infundibulum. And then they narrow to form the ampulla. To me, this has always been backwards. Maybe 200 years ago, somebody made a mistake, and we just keep perpetuating it. Remember, the stalk of the pituitary gland was called the infundibulum, and the dilated portion of the vas deferens was the ampulla. Well, in this case, we reverse it. The long, narrow portion is the ampulla, and the dilated portion is the infundibulum. The trumpet-like bell part here is infundibulum and ampulla. And then as it passes through the wall of the uterus, this is known as the isthmus. The uterus is a pear-shaped organ. We'll come back to that structure, but I want to finish up here with the oviduct. And it's a little longer component than that. But in any case, the oviduct we saw a little bit on Tuesday, because I was showing you a comparison of its histology to the seminal vesicle. And the oviduct cells, epithelial cells, are simple columnar. With cilia. So the cilia is going to sweep the egg towards the uterus. When we look at that fold of the oviduct, remember we have these complicated but always free to the surface. Look like this. And so the surface would be a simple columnar with long with cilia rather. And so the egg and its surrounding follicular cells is going to be swept along by the cilia towards the uterus, whereas the sperm are deep down in here, much smaller relatively, but you wouldn't be able to see it otherwise. And they're moving from the uterus towards the ovary by the smooth muscle contraction, similar to how they were moved out of the urethra. So the eggs being swept this way and the sperms swimming and being propelled in the opposite direction. And that also known as, that we have so often, there are multiple names for the oviduct, and I've used a couple. We have oviduct, uterine tube, older name is fallopian tube. I used to read stories of when my mother was in nursing training, how new student nurses or new graduate nurses in the OR would be sent by the doctors to go find a fallopian tube for them. And they go scrounging through all the equipment looking for this fallopian tube. And I'm going, must not have been very good nursing students and they didn't remember what the fallopian tube was. And then the Latin term is salpinx. We think of a sphinx for sounds like it. The reason I put that out there is for one of the membranes is called a mesosalpinx, right? And a tubal ligation, the equivalent of a vasectomy. Cutting the oviduct is a salpingectomy. So that's where that term comes from. Right, so we look at the structure of the uterus now. So here's the placement. And again, it's not showing it as posterolateral as it really is, but in that relationship. We have the components of the uterus. Let me diagram them now. So this portion up here is known as the fundus. Kind of across the top there. Most of the uterine cavity belongs to the body of the uterus. And then this narrowed portion is identified as the cervix. The narrow space the cervical canal, which is also lined by simple columnar epithelium. This opening from the uterine cavity to the cervical canal, the word for opening is os. So we have the internal os. That's where the baby's head, if it's being born, is going to pass through to get into the cervical canal. And the sperm coming up are going to pass through the external os first. They're going in opposite directions from the baby. So if a woman has a pap smear, then it's a scraping of the cervical canal epithelia, looking for any changes. There's usually stages, leading from just some changes to actual infection of cervical cancer. This is where the HPV virus, the human papillomavirus, HPV organism, is thought to affect cervical cancer. And actually, I took my son in. We switched him from his pediatrician to our family doctor, because he's playing football and basketball and stuff, and our family physician is also a sports physician. And they wanted to know if he'd had his HPV vaccination. Yeah, so they're giving that to boys as well as to girls, I suppose, so that they don't cause carriovirus for the cervical cancer. Yes?
Do you know the reason why it's not supposed to be given to girls over 17?
I don't know why. It may be that they haven't tested them for it. 2 or 3 years ago, I came down with shingles, which is you've had chickenpox. The shingles the virus hides in the nervous system, and then under stress comes out and reproduces again in the skin. It was the beginning of Christmas, like Christmas Eve. I got it. I don't know what my stress was, but
It was painful.
yeah. I thought maybe I'd come down with breast cancer or something, because it was right along this area here, and I looked it up, and breast cancer is asymptomatic, so I was like, okay. And of course, over the holidays, it made it too late to get the antiviral injections. But on that one, there's a shingles vaccination. You may have seen them advertised on TV. And it said it was only for people who were over 60. And I was like, well, why? And it had only been tested in that particular population. So they didn't know the side effects for it in younger populations. So I don't know if that's the reason they say it's only available if you're less than that age, if it's just that they tested it on a younger population. It's not like it's come up with stuff that there's anything peculiar about it that would not. I think it would be just as effective in somebody that's older. All right, so in looking at the blood supply here we're going to be doing the layers and the endometrium, all of that next week. But obviously the ovary is going to get its own blood supply via the ovarian artery and vein. So that's going to be coming down here. Again, we find it with the suspensory ligament. And then blood supply to the uterus is a branch of the internal iliac. Now, we haven't done the blood supply yet, but that's branches that are found in the pelvis itself. And so these go up and can also send branches to the ovary as well. And we'll look at that distribution next week when we talk about the endometrium. And then below that, we have a smaller branch that's the vaginal artery. So now let's look at the ligaments, and that's where we'll stop. Is look at the ligaments that support the uterus. So on page 94 and 96. So think about me being the, okay, don't think about it. Just accept that I'm the uterus again. And now let's place a sheet over me. Here's the fundus, body, oviducts, cervix, vagina. Where that sheet contacts me and fuses to me is the surface of the uterus.